The thundering of drums announced his arrival before Seraphine ever saw his face. She pressed herself against the weathered timbers of the mill house, flour still dusting her worn apron, her pulse racing as the procession wound through the narrow streets of Briar Hollow. Villagers surged past her, shoving and craning their necks for a glimpse of the spectacle none of them had ever dreamed would grace their forgotten corner of the realm. The Alpha King had come to the borderlands. Banners of midnight black and burnished gold snapped in the autumn wind. 100 mounted warriors rode in perfect formation, their armor gleaming like captured starlight. Behind them rolled gilded carriages bearing nobles whose silks and jewels cost more than this entire village would earn in a decade. And at the center of it all, mounted on a war horse the color of storm clouds, rode the king himself. Seraphine's breath stopped. The years had carved away the gauntness from his face. Time had broadened his shoulders, hardened his jaw, and transformed the desperate fugitive she had hidden in her root cellar into a sovereign who radiated power like heat from a forge. His dark hair was longer now, swept back from a face that seemed sculpted from granite and moonlight. The ceremonial armor he wore emphasized every line of muscle, every inch of the warrior's body she had once held trembling against her own. Kaelin. The name pulsed through her mind like a wound that had never healed. Her hand moved instinctively to her collarbone, where fabric concealed the mark he had left on her skin. The promise mark, he had called it. Not a full claiming bite, but something rarer. Something that bound his word to her flesh. "I'll come back for you," he had whispered against her throat, his lips brushing the fresh mark as dawn crept through the cracks of her cottage. "When I've reclaimed what was stolen. When I can offer you more than a fugitive's empty hands. Wait for me, Seraphine. I will return." She had waited. Through winters and summers that blurred together. Through the pitying glances of villagers who whispered about the miller's daughter who had gone strange, who refused every courtship, who spent her nights staring eastward as if expecting someone to emerge from the darkness. Through the news that trickled in from the capital. The civil war. The bloody campaign that had ended with Kaelin crushing his uncle's rebellion and ascending to the throne his parents had died protecting. The coronation that had made him the most powerful alpha in 3 kingdoms. She had waited for a summons that never came. And now he was here. The procession halted in the village square, and Seraphine watched from the shadows as a herald stepped forward, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "Hear the will of His Majesty Kaelin, Alpha King of Ethermoor, blood of the first pack, and protector of the realm." The mark on her collarbone flared with sudden heat. Seraphine gasped, her hand flying to the spot. It had been dormant for so long, a silver scar she had memorized with her fingertips during countless lonely nights. But now it burned as if freshly made. He was close, so close. "The king seeks a bride," the herald continued. "Noble houses of the borderlands are summoned to present their daughters at Valdrin Keep. In 3 days' time, His Majesty will choose his queen." The word struck Seraphine like a physical blow. A bride. He was here to choose a bride from the noble houses. Not for her. Never for her. She was a miller's daughter with calloused hands and a second-hand dress. She had nothing to offer a king except a mark he had probably forgotten, and a heart he had shattered without ever knowing it. Through the crowd, across the impossible distance of rank and years and broken promises, the Alpha King turned his head. His eyes, golden and burning with an inner fire she remembered from firelit nights in her tiny cottage, swept across the gathered villagers, and stopped. The mark on Seraphine's collarbone seared like a brand. 5 years earlier, the stranger collapsed at her doorstep on the coldest night of the winter. Seraphine had been banking the fire for the night when she heard the thud against her door. She grabbed the iron poker from the hearth and approached cautiously. These were dangerous times. Her father had gone to the eastern markets 3 weeks past and had not returned. The roads were thick with soldiers and deserters from a war she barely understood. When she opened the door, A body tumbled across her threshold. He was barely more than a boy, she thought at first. 19, perhaps 20, with dark hair matted with blood and a face pale as winter moonlight. His clothes had once been fine, she could tell, but they were torn and filthy now, soaked through with melted snow and something darker. His eyes opened, wolf-bright gold, sharp with fever, fixed on her face. "Please," he rasped, "they're hunting me. I just need to rest. One night. I won't bring trouble to your door, I swear it." She should have refused. Should have closed the door and pretended she had seen nothing. The village elders had warned everyone about harboring fugitives. The penalty was death. But Seraphine looked at his eyes, at the desperate dignity in them, and saw something that made her step aside. "Get in," she said. Quickly. She half-dragged him to the pallet by the fire. His body burned with fever despite the cold that clung to his skin. She stripped off his ruined coat and found wounds beneath. Claw marks across his ribs, a gash on his thigh that had been crudely bandaged and was now seeping through. "Who did this to you?" she asked as she gathered her healing supplies. "My uncle." The word was bitter. "He murdered my parents, took the throne. I barely escaped with my life." Seraphine's hands stilled. "Your nobility?" A broken laugh escaped him. "I'm the rightful Alpha King of Ethermore. For all the good it does me now." She should have been afraid. Should have thrown him out before his enemies brought destruction down upon her humble cottage. Instead, she dipped a cloth in warm water and began cleaning his wounds. "Well, Your Majesty," she said quietly. "Tonight you're just a man who needs tending. The politics can wait until morning." He stared at her as if she had spoken in a foreign tongue. Over the following days, she nursed him back from the edge of death. She fed him broth made from the last of her winter stores. She cleaned his wounds and changed his bandages. She sat beside him through fever dreams where he called out for parents who would never answer. And when the fever broke, when he was strong enough to sit up and meet her eyes clearly for the first time, something shifted between them. "You've given me everything," Kaelin said, his voice rough. "Your food, your medicine, your safety, and you don't even know me." "I know enough." Seraphine set down the bowl she had been holding. "I know you needed help. That's enough." "It shouldn't be." He caught her wrist before she could pull away. His grip was gentle but warm. "In my world, kindness is a weapon. No one gives without expecting something in return." "Then your world sounds exhausting." The laugh that escaped him was surprised, genuine. His thumb traced circles on her wrist, and Seraphine felt heat bloom across her skin. "What's your name?" he asked. "Seraphine. Seraphine." He spoke it like a prayer. "I won't forget." On the 7th night, when he was strong enough to leave, he came to her instead. "Come with me," he urged. "I have allies in the north, people who will help me take back my throne. I want you beside me." "I can't." The words tasted like ash. "My father is still out there somewhere. If he returns and finds me gone, then I'll come back for you." Kaelin cupped her face in his hands. "When the war is over, when I can protect you properly, I'll come back, and I'll make you my queen." "Kaelin, let me mark you." His voice dropped, urgent and tender. "Not a full claim. A promise mark. So you'll know I'm bound to my word. So you'll feel me, even across the distance." Seraphine should have refused, should have known that promises made in firelight rarely survived the harsh light of dawn. Instead, she tilted her head, baring her throat. His teeth broke her skin just below her collarbone. The pain was brief, overwhelmed almost instantly by a flood of warmth that spread through her entire body. She felt him then, his presence wrapping around her soul like an embrace. "Wait for me," he breathed against the fresh mark. "I will return." By morning, he was gone. Keeping a promise alive for so long was its own kind of madness. At first, Seraphine had waited with hope burning bright in her chest. Every traveler who passed through Briar Hollow might bring news. Every distant howl in the night might herald his return. The news came, but not the kind she had prayed for. The war was brutal. The usurper king, Kaelin's uncle Malachar, had allies among the noble houses who preferred a puppet on the throne to a true alpha. Battles raged across the kingdom. Cities burned. The death toll climbed into the tens of thousands. And then, 2 years into the conflict, the worst news arrived. They say the young prince is dead, the traveling merchant told the gathered villagers. Ambushed in the thornwood. No body recovered, but no man could have survived that slaughter. Seraphine had walked home in a daze, her hand pressed to the mark on her collarbone. It still pulsed with faint warmth. Surely, if he were dead, she would feel it. Surely the mark would fade. But doubt crept in like winter frost. A year passed. Then another. Her father never returned from the eastern markets. The village healer, old Brinley, confirmed what everyone suspected. The roads had been too dangerous. He had likely perished along with so many others. Seraphine inherited the mill. She learned to grind the grain herself, to maintain the ancient mechanisms, to survive on her own in a world that had taken everything soft from her. The mark never faded. Some nights she would wake gasping from dreams that felt more real than waking. Dreams of golden eyes and whispered promises. Dreams of warm hands on her skin and a voice calling her name across impossible distances. She told herself it meant nothing, that she was clinging to a fantasy because the alternative was too painful to bear. Then, a year ago, the news had changed. The prince lives. The declaration spread through the kingdom like wildfire. He has emerged from hiding with an army at his back. The usurper's forces are falling. 6 months later, Malachar was dead. Kaelin sat upon the throne of Ethermoor. And still he did not come. Seraphine watched from afar as the kingdom celebrated its new Alpha King. She heard tales of his strength, his justice, his mercy to those who surrendered, and his ruthlessness to those who did not. She heard whispers of the noble houses already positioning their daughters to catch his eye. The mark on her collarbone burned constantly now, a low heat she had grown so accustomed to that she barely noticed it anymore. A reminder of a promise made by a desperate boy who had become a king. A king who had clearly forgotten the miller's daughter who had saved his life. "You should accept Torvin's offer," Brinley told her one evening, watching Seraphine knead bread with mechanical precision. "He's a good man. Steady. He would give you children. Stability." "I don't love him." "Love." Brinley snorted. "Love is a luxury for nobles and fools. You need security, child. A woman alone in these times." "I'm not alone." Seraphine's hand moved to her collarbone. "Not entirely." Brinley's eyes softened with pity. "That mark is old, Sarah. If he were coming back, he would have come by now." Seraphine had no answer to that. She told herself to let go. To accept one of the courtships offered by village men who looked at her with honest, uncomplicated desire. To stop staring eastward every night like a fool waiting for a ship that had already sunk. But every time she tried, the mark would pulse with warmth, and she would feel something across the distance. A presence, a searching, a need that matched her own. She could not let go. Even when hope became indistinguishable from madness. Even when waiting became a form of slow death. And now, standing in the shadow of the mill house with the Alpha King's procession filling her village square, Seraphine finally understood the cruelest truth of all. He had come back, but not for her. The mark on her collarbone burned with an intensity she had not felt since the night he gave it to her. Across the crowded square, the Alpha King's golden eyes were still fixed on the spot where she stood hidden in the shadows. Then a woman descended from the nearest carriage. She was beautiful in the way that expensive things were beautiful. Silver blonde hair cascaded over shoulders draped in silk the color of fresh blood. Her features were sharp, aristocratic, and her smile as she approached the king held the satisfaction of a predator who had already caught its prey. "My king," her voice carried across the square like poisoned honey. "Shall we proceed to the keep? The noble daughters await your inspection." Kaelin's gaze lingered on the shadows for one heartbeat longer. Then he turned away. "Yes, Lady Isolith," he replied, his voice flat and cold. "Let us proceed." Seraphine watched him ride toward the keep on the hill, surrounded by guards and nobles and a world she could never be part of. The mark on her collarbone pulsed once, twice, 3 times. And then, just before he disappeared through the keep's gates, she felt something pressed against her consciousness like a desperate whisper. Wait. Sleep did not come that night. Seraphine lay in her narrow bed staring at the ceiling, her hand pressed to the mark that had not stopped burning since the procession. That single word echoed through her mind like a bell that would not stop ringing. Wait. Had she imagined it? Had years of desperate hope finally cracked her grip on reality? She had heard of such things. Omegas who pined so deeply for absent alphas that they began to feel phantom bonds, imaginary connections that existed only in their fractured minds. But the mark was real. The heat pulsing from it was real. And the way his eyes had found her across that crowded square, that had been real too. By morning, Seraphine had convinced herself of nothing. She dressed mechanically, braided her dark hair away from her face, and walked to the village market as she did every week. Flour would not mill itself, and whatever torment her heart was enduring, life continued its relentless demands. The market buzzed with gossip about the royal visit. 3 days, the fishmonger's wife said gleefully. 3 days until he chooses a bride. They say Lady Isolith of House Varenthus is the favorite. She's been traveling with the king's party for months. Traveling or hunting? The blacksmith's daughter laughed. I heard she's had her claws in him since the coronation. Her family funded half his war. Seraphine's stomach churned. She focused on selecting vegetables, keeping her expression neutral. Strange thing, though, the fishmonger's wife continued, lowering her voice. My cousin serves at the keep. She says the king barely sleeps, paces the halls at night like a man possessed, and he keeps asking about the village, wants records of everyone who lives here. Looking for rebels, probably, the blacksmith's daughter replied, or traitors from the old regime. No, that's the odd part. He's asking about women, specifically, women who've lived here for the past several years. Unmarried women. Seraphine's hands trembled. A turnip slipped from her grip and rolled across the cobblestones. You all right, Sarah? The fishmonger's wife peered at her with concern. You've gone pale as milk. Fine, Seraphine managed. Just tired. She gathered her purchases and fled before more questions could follow. The walk home took her past the hill road that wound up to Valdrin Keep. She paused despite herself, shading her eyes against the morning sun to gaze at the ancient fortress. Somewhere behind those walls, Kaelin was reviewing noble daughters like cattle at auction, and asking about unmarried women in the village. It means nothing, she told herself fiercely. He's probably looking for servants, or suspects, or anything other than a miller's daughter he promised to return for, and then forgot. But her mark pulsed warm against her collarbone, and her treacherous heart began to hope again. That evening, she found Brinley waiting at her door. You need to leave, the old healer said without preamble. Tonight, if possible. Seraphine blinked. What? Why? The king's soldiers have been asking questions. About you specifically. Brinley's weathered face was tight with worry. Someone told them about the stranger you harbored years ago. The wounded man who stayed in your cottage for a week during the war. The blood drained from Seraphine's face. I don't know what you did or didn't do back then, Brinley continued. But harboring fugitives during the usurper's reign, even the rightful prince, that's the kind of thing that gets re-examined when new powers want to make examples. Kaelin wouldn't. The king doesn't handle such matters personally. His advisors do. and Lady Isoleth's family has a reputation for eliminating anyone who might complicate their ambitions. Brinley pressed a small pouch into her hands. Coins. Enough to get you to the Western Territories. Leave now, Sarah, before they come for you. Seraphine stared at the pouch, her mind reeling. Wait, he had urged through their connection. But what if waiting meant a noose around her neck? Before she could decide, the thunder of hoofbeats echoed from the road. Riders were approaching, and they were coming fast. Brinley vanished into the shadows between the cottages with surprising speed for her age. Seraphine stood frozen on her threshold, the pouch of coins clutched in her white-knuckled grip, watching torchlight bob through the darkness. 6 riders, royal guards in midnight and gold livery. Too late to run. Seraphine shoved the coins into her apron pocket and forced herself to breathe. She had survived years alone. She had endured heartbreak and poverty and the slow death of hope. She would not crumble now. The lead rider dismounted before her gate. He was not what she expected. Older, perhaps 50 winters, with steel-gray hair cropped close to his skull and a face that bore the scars of countless battles. But his eyes, a deep weathered brown, held something that was not cruelty. Seraphine of Briar Hollow? His voice was gravel and smoke. Who's asking? A ghost of a smile crossed his scarred face. Direct. Good. The king said you would be. Seraphine's chest tightened. The king speaks of me? The king has spoken of little else since the war ended. The man inclined his head in a formal bow that seemed entirely wrong, directed at a miller's daughter. I am Commander Draven, First Sword of the Alpha King. I've been sent to escort you to the keep. Escort. Seraphine tasted the word. Is that what they call arrests now? If this were an arrest, I would not have knocked. Draven's expression remained steady. I would not have come personally, and I certainly would not have brought this. He withdrew a folded paper from his coat, sealed with black wax stamped with the royal crest. Seraphine took it with numb fingers, breaking the seal to find a single line written in a hand she did not recognize, but somehow knew. The promise was never broken. Come to me, please. The mark on her collarbone flared so hot she nearly gasped. How do I know this is from him? She demanded. Draven reached into his collar and withdrew a leather cord. Hanging from it was a pendant she recognized instantly. A small iron wolf, crudely forged, that she had given Kaelin the night before he left. She had made it herself, hammering it out in the village smithy, a token to remember her by. He has worn this against his heart since the day he left your cottage, Draven said quietly. Through 3 years of war, through imprisonment and torture at his uncle's hands, through every battle and every sleepless night since he took the throne. Imprisonment? Seraphine's voice cracked. There is much you don't know, my lady. Much the king wishes to tell you himself. Draven returned the pendant to its place beneath his armor. But I will say this. He tried to come for you. The moment the war ended, he rode for this village with 50 men at his back. Then where was he? The words tore from her throat. I waited. I waited so long? Draven's jaw tightened. He was intercepted. Betrayed by those he trusted. By the time he escaped and returned to power, a year had passed, and your village had been told he was dead. His enemies made sure of it. The world tilted beneath Seraphine's feet. He has been searching for you ever since, Draven continued. But you had vanished. No one knew your name. The villagers who remembered the stranger you harbored were scattered or dead. The king has sent agents to every corner of the realm, following whispers and rumors. His voice softened. The bride selection is a ruse, a pretense to explain his presence here while he searches. Lady Isoleth believes she has won. She does not know that the king would sooner burn his own throne than marry anyone but you. Seraphine could not breathe. Years of doubt, years of convincing herself she had been forgotten. And all along he had been fighting his way back to her. Will you come? Draven asked. Before Seraphine could answer, An arrow sang out of the darkness and buried itself in Draven's shoulder. The commander staggered. His guards drew swords, forming a protective circle as more arrows hissed from the tree line. Seraphine saw dark shapes moving between the trees, at least a dozen, closing in fast. "Varanthus assassins!" one of the guards shouted. "They've found us!" Draven wrenched the arrow from his shoulder with a grunt of pain. "Get the girl inside. Protect her with your lives." "No." Seraphine grabbed his arm. "My cottage has a root cellar. Hidden entrance behind the woodpile. We can hold them off from there." Draven met her eyes and nodded once. "Lead the way." They ran. The root cellar had been Seraphine's secret since childhood. Her father had built it during the first conflicts in the borderlands, a hidden refuge accessible only through a narrow gap behind the stacked firewood. Inside, the earthen chamber was small but defensible, with only one entrance and walls too thick for arrows to penetrate. Seraphine pulled the wooden covering back into place as the last guard squeezed through. Darkness swallowed them, broken only by the thin moonlight seeping through cracks in the cottage floor above. "How did they know?" one of the guards hissed. "Lady Isoleth has spies everywhere." Draven's voice was tight with pain. He had bound his shoulder with a strip torn from his cloak, but dark blood was already seeping through. She's suspected the king's true purpose for weeks. When she learned he was sending men to the village tonight, she must have dispatched her own. Above them, Seraphine heard boots crashing through her cottage door. Furniture splintered, pottery shattered, voices called out in harsh commands. Search everything. The Omega dies tonight." Seraphine's blood turned to ice. "She wants me dead? I'm nobody. I'm not a threat to her." Draven laughed bitterly, then winced at the pain the movement caused. "You are the only threat that matters. You hold the king's promise mark. Do you understand what that means? It means he made a vow. It means he cannot complete a mating bond with anyone else." Draven's eyes found hers in the darkness. "A promise mark is not just words, my lady. It is a binding of the soul. Until it is either fulfilled or severed by death, the alpha who gave it is incapable of claiming another mate. Every attempt would fail. Every bond would shatter." The revelation crashed through Seraphine like a wave. "That's why Lady Isoleth has been traveling with him," she breathed. "That's why they haven't announced an engagement despite months of rumors. He can't bond with her. He cannot bond with anyone but you, and Isoleth knows it. She has been searching for you even longer than the king has, though for very different reasons." Draven shifted, grimacing. "She needs you dead, Seraphine. Only your death will free him to claim another." Footsteps creaked on the floor above their heads. Everyone went still. "There's nothing here," a voice said. "Just a peasant's hovel. She must have fled when she saw us coming." "Then find her trail. Lady Isoleth wants proof of death by dawn, or we all answer for the failure." The boots retreated. The cottage door slammed. Seraphine released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "We need to get you to the keep," Draven said quietly. "To the king. It's the only place you'll be safe." "And walk straight into Lady Isoleth's territory?" One of the guards shook his head. "The keep is crawling with Varanthus soldiers. They control half the royal household. Then we go around them. There's a passage." Draven struggled to sit upright. "Old tunnels from the first pack wars. They connect the village shrine to the keep's lower chambers. The king showed me the entrance in case something like this happened." Seraphine stared at him. "He planned for this?" "He planned for everything. He has spent years preparing for the moment he found you, and years preparing for those who would try to stop him." Draven met her gaze with fierce intensity. "The king loves you, Seraphine, not as a memory or an obligation, as the other half of his soul. Everything he has done since the war ended has been about reaching you." The mark on her collarbone pulsed with warmth so intense it brought tears to her eyes. All this time, all these years of doubt and loneliness and fading hope, he had been fighting for her, searching for her, loving her across the distance with a constancy that had nearly destroyed him. "The tunnels," she said, her voice steady despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. "Show me the way." Draven nodded, and something like relief softened his battle-hardened features. "Stay close," he instructed. "And whatever happens, do not stop moving. The king is waiting." He pushed aside a section of the earthen wall, revealing a passage that descended into absolute darkness. Seraphine took a breath and stepped into the unknown. Behind her, faint and distant but unmistakable, a wolf's howl split the night. It was a sound of fury, of desperation, of an alpha who had just learned his mate was in danger. The passage was ancient. Seraphine felt the weight of centuries pressing down as she followed Draven through the narrow corridor. Roots pierced the earthen ceiling like grasping fingers. The air hung thick with the smell of damp soil and something older, something that whispered of forgotten wars and desperate escapes. 2 guards moved ahead with torches. 2 more guarded the rear. Draven walked beside Seraphine despite his wound, one hand on his sword, his breathing labored but steady. "These tunnels were built during the First Pack Wars," he explained quietly, "when the borderlands were contested territory. The villagers needed a way to reach the keep without being seen by enemy scouts." "I've lived here my entire life," Seraphine murmured. "I never knew they existed." "Few do. The knowledge was nearly lost during the usurper's reign. Kalen found references in his father's journals and spent months searching for the entrances." Draven's voice softened. "He was looking for any advantage, any way to reach you without alerting those who watched." The tunnel twisted and branched. Draven navigated the maze without hesitation, clearly having memorized the path. Seraphine tried to focus on putting one foot in front of the other, but her mind kept spinning with everything she had learned. All those years, all that time believing herself forgotten while Kalen fought through war, imprisonment, and betrayal to find her. The promise mark on her collarbone pulsed steadily now, a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Through it, she could feel something she had never noticed before, a presence at the edge of her consciousness, distant but drawing closer with every passing moment. Kalen. He was coming. "Commander." One of the forward guards held up a fist. "Movement ahead." Everyone froze. In the torchlight, Seraphine could see the tunnel widening into a small chamber. And at its far end, where another passage branched away, shadows shifted. "Impossible," Draven breathed. "No one else knows these routes." "Lady Isoleth's family ruled these borderlands before the First Pack Wars," one of the guards said grimly. "Perhaps they kept records of their own." The shadows resolved into figures. 6 men in dark leather armor, their faces covered with black cloth, their weapons already drawn. Varendhis assassins. "The Omega dies here," the lead assassin said flatly. "Step aside, Commander. Your king need never know you tried to stop us." Draven drew his sword despite his wounded shoulder. "I would rather die than betray him." "That can be arranged." The assassins attacked. The tunnel erupted into chaos. Steel clashed against steel, the sounds echoing off the earthen walls in a deafening cacophony. The guards fought with desperate skill, but they were outnumbered, and the confined space negated their training. Seraphine pressed herself against the wall, searching frantically for anything she could use as a weapon. Her hand closed around a loose stone, heavy and jagged-edged. One of the guards fell with a gurgled cry. Then another. Draven was holding 2 assassins at bay, but his movements were slowing, his wounded shoulder betraying him. Blood soaked his entire left side now. An assassin broke through the line and lunged toward Seraphine. She did not think. She simply moved. The stone connected with the side of his head with a sickening crack. He crumpled at her feet, and Seraphine stared at her trembling hands in shock. "Behind you!" Draven shouted. She spun. Another assassin was already swinging his blade toward her throat. Time seemed to slow. Seraphine saw the torchlight gleaming on the steel. Saw her own death approaching with cold inevitability. And then heat erupted from her collarbone. The promise mark ignited like a captured sun. Golden light poured from her skin, so bright it turned the tunnel into noon. The assassin screamed, throwing up his arms to shield his eyes. Seraphine felt power surge through her veins, power she had never known she possessed. It burst from her in a wave of brilliant energy that slammed into the remaining assassins and sent them flying against the walls. When the light faded, she stood alone in a circle of unconscious bodies. Draven stared at her with something like awe. "What?" Seraphine gasped. "Was that?" "The promise mark." Draven's voice was hoarse. "It carries a piece of the Alpha's essence, his power, bound to your soul until the bond is completed." He laughed weakly. "I don't think even the king knew it could manifest like this." Seraphine looked down at her hands. They still trembled, but with energy now rather than fear. The mark on her collarbone hummed with warmth, and across their connection, she felt Kaelin's presence surge with desperate urgency. He had felt her use his power. He was coming faster now. "Can you walk?" Seraphine asked Draven. The commander nodded, though he swayed on his feet. Only 2 guards remained standing, both wounded but alive. "The keep is close," Draven managed. "We need to move before more of them come." They pressed forward through the darkness, leaving the groaning assassins behind. Seraphine's newly awakened power flickered beneath her skin like banked coals, ready to ignite again if needed. She did not know what she was becoming, but she was done being afraid of it. They emerged into a wine cellar. Barrels lined the walls, and the air smelled of oak and fermented grapes. Seraphine blinked in the dim light filtering through a grated ceiling, her eyes adjusting after the absolute darkness of the tunnels. "The keep's lower stores," Draven confirmed. "We need to reach the king's private chambers. He'll be—" The cellar door exploded inward. Seraphine's power surged instinctively, light gathering at her fingertips. But the figure that burst through was not an enemy. Kaelin stood in the doorway, his chest heaving, and his eyes molten gold with barely contained emotion. He wore no armor, no crown, nothing but a simple black shirt half unlaced and breeches hastily pulled on. His feet were bare against the cold stone. He had come running the moment he felt her. For one endless heartbeat, they simply stared at each other. The years dissolved like morning mist. Seraphine saw the boy she had nursed back from death's door, the desperate fugitive who had whispered promises against her skin. But she also saw the man he had become, the king who had torn apart a kingdom to find her, the Alpha whose power resonated against her own with almost painful intensity. Seraphine. Her name broke from his throat like a prayer and a sob combined. Then she was in his arms. She did not remember moving. One moment they stood apart, separated by the length of the cellar. The next, his arms were crushing her against his chest, his face buried in her hair, his entire body shaking with the force of his emotions. "You're alive," he breathed. "You're here. I felt you use the mark's power, and I thought they had... I'm all right." Seraphine's voice was muffled against his chest. "Kaelin, I'm all right." He pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands. His thumbs traced her cheekbones as if memorizing her features. Tears tracked down his face, this powerful Alpha King weeping openly at the sight of her. "So long," he choked out. "I searched so long. I dreamed of this moment. And I was so afraid I would never—" She kissed him. It was not gentle. Years of longing and grief and desperate hope poured into the press of her lips against his. He responded instantly, one hand tangling in her hair, the other pulling her closer as if he could merge their bodies into one. The promise mark flared between them. Seraphine felt the incomplete bond straining toward completion, 2 halves of a soul reaching for each other across the chasm that had separated them for so long. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for air, Kaelin pressed his forehead to hers. "I never forgot," he said fiercely. "Not for one moment. Not through the war or the imprisonment or the years of searching. You were with me every second, Seraphine. The mark carried your essence just as it carried mine. I felt you. Even when I couldn't find you, I felt you. I thought you had abandoned me. The confession tore from her throat. I thought the promise was just words to comfort a foolish girl who had given her heart to a stranger. Never. The word was absolute. You are my mate. My true mate. I knew it the moment you opened your door to a bleeding fugitive and demanded nothing in return. His hands tightened on her face. I love you, Seraphine. I have loved you since before I knew what love meant, and I will spend the rest of my existence proving it if you'll let me. A sob escaped her. I never stopped loving you. Even when I tried. Even when hope felt like madness. I couldn't let you go. Kaelin made a sound that was half laugh, half cry. My brave, impossible Omega. He kissed her forehead, her eyelids, her cheeks. My heart. My home. Your Majesty. Draven's voice cut through the moment, pained but urgent. Forgive me, but we have a problem. Kaelin's head snapped up, his arms tightening protectively around Seraphine. Report. Lady Isoleth's assassins found us in the tunnels. They knew the route. They were waiting. Draven swayed, and one of the remaining guards caught his arm. She knows Seraphine is here. She'll move against us openly now. The warmth in Kaelin's eyes transformed to ice. Then she has made her last mistake. His voice dropped to a register that made Seraphine's instincts shiver with primal recognition. The Alpha King was rising. Summon my guard, all of them, and send word to the noble houses in the keep. What word, Majesty? Kaelin looked down at Seraphine, and something fierce and tender ignited in his honey-gold gaze. Tell them the king has found his queen. The great hall of Valdrin Keep had not seen such tension in a generation. Seraphine stood beside Kaelin on the raised dais, acutely aware of every eye in the chamber fixed upon her. She still wore her flower-dusted dress, her hair still tangled from the tunnel escape. She looked exactly like what she was, a miller's daughter who had no business standing next to a king. But Kaelin's hand gripped hers with fierce possession, and the promise mark on her collarbone shone for all to see, glowing faintly golden through the thin fabric of her dress. This is absurd. Lady Isoleth's voice cut through the murmuring crowd like a blade. She stood at the front of the assembled nobles, her silver blonde hair immaculate, her crimson gown worth more than Seraphine's entire village. You summon us in the middle of the night to present a peasant as your chosen bride? Have you lost your mind entirely? I have found it, Kaelin replied coldly. For the first time in years, I have found it. She is nobody. A commoner with no bloodline, no dowry, no political value whatsoever. She is the woman who saved my life when your family's allies were hunting me like an animal. Kaelin's voice rose, carrying to every corner of the hall. She is the woman I marked as my promised mate before I had a throne to offer her. She is the woman I have searched for since the moment I was free to search. Isoleth's beautiful face twisted with barely concealed fury. The promise mark is a children's tale. It holds no legal weight. The bride selection is hereby concluded. Kaelin released Seraphine's hand and stepped forward. You played your games well, Isoleth. You funded my war, positioned yourself at my side, and made yourself indispensable while your spies searched for the woman whose existence threatened everything you had built. The hall went utterly silent. I know about the assassins, Kaelin continued, his voice deadly soft. I know you sent them to Briar Hollow tonight. I know you have been hunting Seraphine for years, hoping to kill her before I could find her. Isoleth's composure cracked. You have no proof. I have the assassins we captured in the tunnels, all of them very eager to trade testimony for their lives. Kaelin smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. I have Commander Draven's account of the attack, and I have the bodies of 4 Varenthus soldiers found in passages that only your family knew existed. Nobles began stepping away from Isoleth, creating a widening circle of empty space around her. You think you've won? Isoleth's voice rose to a shriek. You think you can humiliate my house and face no consequences? The Varenthis have ruled these borderlands for centuries. We have allies, armies, resources you cannot imagine. You have nothing. Kaelin's voice dropped to a growl. Your father's armies swore fealty to me when I took the throne. Your allies have already been informed of your treason. And your resources? He gestured to the guards who were quietly surrounding her. They mean nothing against the justice of the crown. Isoleth's hand moved toward her sleeve. Don't. Seraphine's voice rang out, surprising even herself. Everyone turned to look at her. Seraphine stepped forward, her chin raised despite the terror pounding through her veins. You've spent years hunting me because I stood between you and what you wanted. You sent men to kill me in my home, in the tunnels, anywhere you could reach me. She stopped directly in front of Isoleth, close enough to see the hatred burning in those ice-blue eyes. But I'm still here, Seraphine said quietly. And you are the one who has lost everything. Isoleth's composure shattered completely. She lunged, a hidden dagger flashing from her sleeve, aimed directly at Seraphine's throat. The promise mark exploded with light. Golden energy burst from Seraphine in a protective wave that sent Isoleth flying backward. The dagger clattered across the stone floor. Isoleth landed hard, her crimson gown pooling around her like spilled blood. The assembled nobles gasped. Several dropped to their knees instinctively, responding to the raw display of alpha power emanating from the miller's daughter who should have had none. Kaelin was at Seraphine's side instantly, his arm wrapping around her waist. But his expression was not concerned. It was triumphant. The promise mark carries a piece of my essence, he announced to the stunned hall. My power, bound to her soul. She is not just my chosen mate. She is my equal in every way that matters. He looked down at Seraphine with such profound love that her breath caught. She always has been. Guards seized Isoleth's arms, hauling her upright. Her face was twisted with impotent rage, all pretense of noble grace abandoned. This isn't over, she spat. My family will. Your family will face judgment for conspiracy against the crown. Kaelin cut her off. Take her to the dungeons. She can contemplate her choices while awaiting trial. As the guards dragged Isoleth away, her screams of fury echoing through the corridors, Kaelin turned to face the assembled nobles. The bride selection is concluded, he repeated. Seraphine of Briar Hollow will be my queen. Any who object may speak now. The silence was absolute. Then we are finished here. Kaelin swept Seraphine into his arms, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. My mate and I have years of separation to remedy. We are not to be disturbed until morning. He carried her from the hall, leaving 100 stunned nobles in their wake. Kaelin's private chambers were larger than Seraphine's entire cottage. She barely noticed. The moment the door closed behind them, Kaelin set her gently on her feet, and then simply held her, his arms wrapped tight around her body, his face buried in her hair. They stood like that for a long time. I'm afraid to let go, he admitted against her neck. Afraid I'll wake up and find this was another dream? I've had so many dreams, Seraphine. So many nights where I found you, held you, only to wake alone. I dreamed of you too. Her hands fisted in the fabric of his shirt. I thought I was going mad. The dreams felt so real. The promise mark. He pulled back just enough to trace the glowing spot on her collarbone. It connected us even across the distance, our souls reaching for each other in sleep when our bodies couldn't touch. His fingers lingered on the mark, and Seraphine shivered at the sensation. I need to know everything, she whispered. What happened to you? Why it took so long? All of it. Pain flickered across his features. It's not a pleasant tale. I don't care. I need to understand. So he told her. He told her about the war's brutal end, how he had crushed his uncle's forces and retaken the throne, how he had immediately ridden for Briar Hollow, desperate to fulfill his promise. I was intercepted 3 days from the village, he continued, his voice rough. Betrayed by a commander I trusted. He was in Isoleth's pocket, though I didn't know it then. They ambushed my party, killed most of my guards, and took me prisoner. Seraphine's chest clenched. Prisoner? Isoleth's father wanted leverage. He thought he could force me to marry his daughter by threatening my life. Kaylin's laugh was bitter. He didn't understand that my life meant nothing without you. I refused every demand. So they tried other methods. The scars she had noticed on his hands. The faint marks on his wrists where shackles had bitten. Kaylin, she breathed. It took me a year to escape. A year of captivity while Isoleth spread rumors that I had gone mad with grief, that I was unfit to rule. By the time I reached the capital and reclaimed control, she had already searched Briar Hollow and found nothing. You had hidden yourself too well. I changed my name. Seraphine's voice was small. After the news came that you were dead, I couldn't bear hearing people speak of it, so I became someone else. You survived. He cupped her face again. That's all that matters. You survived, and I found you, and nothing will ever separate us again. The promise mark pulsed with warmth. The bond, Seraphine said slowly. Draven told me it can't be completed while the promise mark exists, that you can't fully claim anyone else. That's true. But what about me? She met his eyes. Can you complete it with me? Heat flared in Kaylin's golden gaze. The promise mark was always meant to transform. When the promise is fulfilled, when both parties accept the bond willingly, it becomes a true claiming mark. His thumb traced her lower lip. I have waited so long for this moment, Seraphine, to make you mine completely, to bind my soul to yours beyond any power to break. Then why are we still talking? The words barely left her mouth before his lips claimed hers. This kiss was different from the desperate reunion in the cellar. This was deliberate, thorough. His hands tangled in her hair as his mouth explored hers with years of stored hunger. Seraphine responded with equal fervor, her fingers working the laces of his shirt, needing to feel his skin against her palms. When her hands finally pressed flat against his chest, they both gasped at the electric connection. Are you certain? Kaylin's voice was rough, his control visibly fraying. Once the bond is complete, there's no undoing it. You will be bound to me forever. I've been bound to you since I was 18 years old. Seraphine tilted her head, baring her throat. Make it official. His eyes burned gold. When his teeth sank into the promise mark, Seraphine cried out as pleasure and power crashed through her in waves. The incomplete bond shattered and reformed, stronger than steel, deeper than bone. She felt Kaylin's essence pour into her soul even as hers flowed into his. Every memory, every emotion, every moment of suffering and hope and desperate love laid bare between them. She saw herself through his eyes, the brave girl who had opened her door to a wounded stranger, the constant presence in his mind through years of war and captivity, the shining beacon he had followed across kingdoms to find. And he saw himself through hers, the boy who had made impossible promises, the absence that had nearly destroyed her, the love she had never stopped carrying despite every reason to let go. When the bond finally settled into place, complete and unbreakable, they were both weeping. My queen, Kaylin murmured against her marked throat. My king, she answered. The overwhelming joy that flowed between them needed no words. Morning light streamed through the chamber windows when the pounding started. Seraphine woke tangled in Kaylin's arms, their bodies still intertwined from the night's exertions. The bond hummed between them, a constant warm presence that made her feel more complete than she had ever known possible. But the pounding continued, urgent and frantic. Your Majesty! Draven's voice strained with pain and something worse. You must come immediately. Kalen was on his feet in an instant, pulling on clothes with military efficiency. Seraphine followed, her pulse racing with unnamed dread. When they opened the door, Draven stood supported by 2 guards, his face ashen beneath fresh bandages. Lady Isoleth escaped during the night, he reported. She had allies among the dungeon guards, but that's not the worst of it. What happened? Kalen demanded. She's taken hostages, the servants who attended your chambers, the guards who arrested her, anyone she could reach during her escape. Draven's voice cracked. Including the village healer who came to the keep seeking refuge, the old woman named Brinley. Seraphine's blood turned to ice. Brinley is here? She arrived hours ago, worried about you. She walked straight into Isoleth's trap. Draven handed Kalen a folded paper. This was left for you. Kalen read the message, his expression darkening with each line. Without a word, he passed it to Seraphine. Your pet Omega has cost me everything. Now she will watch as I take everything from her. Come to the Eastern Tower before noon, alone, or I begin executing hostages. Starting with the old woman who helped hide her from me all these years. Choose wisely, Your Majesty. Your throne or your whore. You cannot have both. Isoleth Seraphine's hand shook as she lowered the paper. How many hostages? She asked quietly. 12. Draven's voice was heavy, all innocent, all loyal to the crown. She's not thinking clearly, Kalen said grimly. This ends with her death no matter what she does. She must know that. She doesn't care anymore. Seraphine understood with horrible clarity. She's lost everything. Her ambitions, her family's power, her future. All she has left is revenge. Across the bond, she felt Kalen's mind racing through tactical options. Assault teams, negotiation tactics, rescue attempts that all carried unacceptable risks. 12 lives hanging in the balance, including the woman who had been like a grandmother to her. There's another way, Seraphine heard herself say. Kalen's attention snapped to her. No. She wants me. That's what this has always been about. If I go to her. Absolutely not. His voice brooked no argument. I just found you. I will not send you into the hands of a woman who has spent years trying to kill you. You won't be sending me. I'll be choosing to go. Seraphine cupped his face in her hands. The bond is complete now. She can't threaten it anymore. And I'm not the helpless Omega she thinks I am. The power from the previous night still hummed beneath her skin. The mark, now a true claiming bite, pulsed with warmth that was as much hers as his. I can feel your strength inside me, she continued. Your power, shared through the bond. Let me use it. Let me end this. Seraphine. Those people are dying because of me, because Isoleth hates me. I won't hide while others pay the price for my existence. She pressed her forehead to his. You searched for years to find me. Trust that I'll come back to you. The anguish in his eyes nearly broke her resolve, but their bond carried something else. Pride. Fierce, overwhelming pride in the woman she had become. 1 hour, he said roughly. If you're not out in 1 hour, I'm coming in with every soldier I have. Deal. He kissed her hard, pouring desperation and love and terror into the press of his lips. Come back to me, he commanded against her mouth. Always, she promised. And walked toward the Eastern Tower alone. The Eastern Tower had been abandoned for decades. Seraphine climbed the crumbling stairs alone, her pulse steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. The claiming mark on her collarbone hummed with warmth, Kalen's presence a constant reassurance at the edge of her consciousness. She could feel his fear, his desperate desire to follow despite his promise. I'm all right, she sent across their connection. Trust me. The response came back wordlessly. Love, faith, and a ferocious readiness to destroy anything that harmed her. The tower's top chamber was larger than she expected, its windows open to the autumn wind. 12 hostages knelt in a line along the far wall, their hands bound and their faces pale with terror. Brinley was among them, her old eyes widening when Seraphine appeared. "Child, no," Brinley breathed. "Run, run while you can." "She can't run." Isoleth emerged from the shadows, a sword in her hand. Her crimson gown was torn, her silver hair disheveled, her ice-blue eyes alight with madness. "She's exactly where I want her. I came alone, as you demanded." Seraphine kept her voice steady. "Release the hostages." "Did you really think it would be that simple?" Isoleth laughed, high and unhinged. "I don't want to negotiate, you stupid girl. I want you dead. I want to feel your blood on my hands. I want the king to know that his precious mate died screaming." "Then why the hostages?" "Insurance, motivation." Isoleth gestured with her sword. "And witnesses? I want them to see the light leave your eyes. I want them to carry that image to their graves." Seraphine assessed the situation with strange calm. The hostages were too far to reach quickly. Isoleth stood between her and any escape. The sword in the noblewoman's hand gleamed with a dark coating. "Poison." "Of course. You know you can't win," Seraphine said. "Even if you kill me, the king will destroy you." "I don't care about winning anymore." Isoleth's voice cracked. "I care about taking something from him. Something precious. Something irreplaceable." Her grip tightened on the sword. "He chose you over me? A miller's daughter. A nobody. Do you have any idea how that felt?" "I didn't choose this." "No. You just existed. You just happened to be kind to a wounded stranger, and somehow that was enough to steal everything I had worked for my entire life." Isoleth raised the sword. "It ends now." She lunged. Seraphine did not think. She simply reached for the power humming beneath her skin. The claiming mark exploded with golden light. Energy burst from her in a blinding wave, but Isoleth was prepared this time. She twisted aside, the light grazing rather than striking her. The sword arced toward Seraphine's chest. Time seemed to slow. Across the bond, she felt Kaelin's scream of terror. And then something inside her shifted. The power she had touched before had been defensive, reactive. But now, facing death, something deeper awakened. Something that was not borrowed from Kaelin but entirely her own. Seraphine had always been a healer. She had always been able to sense the life force in others, to nurture it, to strengthen it. Now she understood that healing was only half of that gift. She reached out with her newly awakened power and touched the life force flowing through Isoleth's veins, and stopped it. The noblewoman froze mid-strike, her eyes going wide with shock. The sword clattered from her nerveless fingers. She collapsed to her knees, clutching her chest. "What?" Isoleth gasped. "What did you—" "I can feel every heartbeat in this room," Seraphine said quietly. "Every pulse of blood through every vein. I could end your life with a thought." She crouched before her enemy, meeting those ice-blue eyes that had haunted her nightmares. "But I won't," she continued. "Because I'm not you. Because killing in cold blood would make me something I don't want to be. And because you're going to spend the rest of your life in a cell, knowing that the miller's daughter you despised had the power to destroy you and chose mercy instead." Isoleth's face contorted with impotent rage. She lunged for the fallen sword. Seraphine's power pulsed. Isoleth collapsed unconscious to the stone floor. Seraphine straightened, breathing hard. The hostages stared at her with a mixture of awe and fear. Brinley was weeping openly. "Is everyone all right?" Seraphine asked, moving to untie the first prisoner. Before anyone could answer, the door burst open. Kaelin stood on the threshold, his chest heaving, his eyes wild with barely contained emotion. Behind him crowded dozens of guards, their weapons drawn. He took in the scene with a single glance. Isoleth unconscious on the floor, the hostages being freed. Seraphine, unharmed and radiant with power she had never known she possessed. "You did it," he breathed. "You actually— I told you to trust me." He crossed the room in 3 strides and swept her into his arms. She sensed his overwhelming relief, his pride, his love so vast it threatened to consume them both. "Never again," he growled against her hair. "Never again am I letting you walk into danger alone. I seem to recall you doing exactly that for 3 years of war. That was different." "How?" "Because you're more important than me." He pulled back to cup her face. "You're more important than anything. Don't you understand that yet?" Seraphine smiled, exhausted and exhilarated and more in love than she had ever imagined possible. "Then I suppose you'll have to spend the rest of our lives convincing me." "That," Kaelin murmured, lowering his lips to hers, "is exactly what I intend to do." The coronation of Queen Seraphine took place on the winter solstice. The great hall of the capital blazed with 1,000 candles, their light reflecting off gilded columns and ancient tapestries that had witnessed centuries of royal ceremonies. Nobles from every corner of the realm had gathered to witness the miller's daughter take her place beside the Alpha King. Seraphine stood before the crowd in a gown of midnight blue embroidered with golden thread, the colors of the royal house she was about to join. The claiming mark on her collarbone was visible, displayed proudly above the neckline. No longer a secret. No longer a promise waiting to be fulfilled. A bond completed. A love proven through years of separation and suffering. The high priestess raised the crown, a delicate circlet of gold and sapphires that caught the candlelight like captured stars. "Do you, Seraphine of Briar Hollow, accept the duties and honors of Queen of Ethermore? Do you swear to protect its people, uphold its laws, and stand beside your king through all trials to come?" "I do," Seraphine answered, her voice carrying clear and strong across the hushed hall. The crown settled onto her head, lighter than she had expected but heavy with meaning. Kaelin took her hands in his golden eyes bright with unshed tears. "My queen," he declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "My equal. My heart." "My king," she answered, squeezing his hands. "My home. My future." When he kissed her, the crowd erupted in cheers that shook the ancient rafters. Through their bond, Seraphine felt Kaelin's joy, boundless and radiant, and knew her own matched it perfectly. Later that night, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the celebrating kingdom, Kaelin wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "I made you a promise once," he murmured. "In a tiny cottage, in a forgotten village, to a girl who saved my life. I remember. I told you I would come back for you, that I would make you my queen." His arms tightened. "It took longer than I planned, cost more than I ever imagined, but I kept my word." Seraphine turned in his embrace, reaching up to touch his face. "You did," she agreed softly, "and it was worth every moment of waiting." The wolves of Ethermore lifted their voices to the moon, a chorus of joy celebrating their king and queen. And in the cottage, at the edge of Briar Hollow, where a wounded fugitive had once made an impossible promise, the fire had long since gone cold. But the love kindled there burned brighter than ever before. A promise made, a promise kept. A love that had survived war, betrayal, and years of heartbreak. They had found their way back to each other against all odds, and they would never be parted again. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.